Welcome back to Morning Joe. As we told you earlier in the hour, more than 200 mayors have signed a letter calling on the Senate to return early from summer break to pass the background check bills that have already been approved in the U.S. House of Representatives. Joining us now is one of those mayors, Chicago's Lori Lightfoot, also with us for this conversation, the host of MSNBC's Politic Nation, and my friend, the president of the National Action Network, Reverend Al Sharpton. Rev, good to see you. Mayor Lightfoot, I ask you, it's kind of amazing to me. There was a conference call the other day among House Democrats where there was some kind of a split between them about, what they should do. Should they come back into session? Should they try to pressure the Senate to come back into session? The idea that Democrats aren't unified on this front strikes me as amazing. Make the case for why it is absolutely necessary, both politically and practically, to get the Senate back in session to deal with this matter.
Well, all we need to say is Gilroy, El Paso, Dayton, Charlottesville, Sandy Hook, Chicago, every major city, every small town across the United States is affected by gun violence. It's time for the Senate to come back in and do its job. Give us a clean bill, no poison pills, get the job done.
Do you think, Mayor Lightfoot, it has been raised on this show earlier today, that, the background check bill, although it would be a first step, it'd be great to, given that it's been passed by the House, it'd be great to see it enacted into law when 97% of Americans are for it, that there are an awful lot of these shootings that would not actually be stopped by that if it were in the law. And in fact, we need to go much further, certainly at least as far as to the assault weapons ban, if we're going to make a real dent in the problem.
Well, look, given the inaction of Congress over so many years, over so many tragedies, Parkland being another one of them, let's take the first step. The fact that we have a patchwork of state laws that have background checks, some do, some don't, we have to have a uniform system. That's got to be the floor. Of course we need an assault weapons ban as well, but let's start with getting universal background checks.
Madam Mayor, in 2013, I stayed in Chicago off and on with Reverend Hatch and others, and I've discovered it's a real complex problem in terms of dealing with the gun violence that you now are in charge of the city. And you combine that with the Laquan McDonald police brutality case, a case you courageously challenged your predecessor on. And I think more than any mayor, you can have the balance of dealing with the broken community police relations and dealing with the gun problem. Is that part of why you took on Ivanka Trump, kind of miscasting what happened in Chicago last weekend in comparison to El Paso and Dayton, Ohio?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you really want to help, pick up the phone and call me. Ask me what you can do from the platform that you have to really benefit cities that are in need. That's the number one thing. Don't govern by tweet, and don't get the facts wrong. That's why I really took issue with what she did. We have established a line of communication. Her staff is in contact with us on a regular basis. If you really want to make a difference, you don't do it via tweet, via Facebook, via Instagram. You get down, you understand what the facts are, and then you offer a path forward.
Mayor Lightfoot, this is Yasmin Vasugian. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said he doesn't even want to take up a bill that has red flag laws on it because that doesn't even go far enough. Red flag laws, as we well know, is currently in 17 states across the country. Is that playing politics?
Look, I think that if we have this moment where the Republicans are saying that they're willing to actually move forward, where Mitch McConnell isn't just being a complete obstructionist, we got to take advantage of that moment. And I have a lot of respect for Senator Schumer, but now is the time to get something done. What we all need to ask ourselves is how many more people have to die before the Congress puts aside partisan bickering, their own desire to perpetuate power. How do we explain that to the young children and the young mothers and the grandmothers who are shattered on a daily basis as a result of gun violence?
But Mayor Lightfoot, you say, you asked that question, which is such an important one. How many people need to die until something is done? You had Leader McConnell on the radio yesterday saying, I want bipartisan legislation in place before I even bring a bill, before we come back from recess to know something is actually going to get passed. Is it possible to even have bipartisan legislation in place that could get passed on something as controversial as gun reform?
Of course it is. The House has passed legislation that I think a number of senators, if it was actually put to a vote, would pass and send to the president. So yeah, of course it's possible. But the politicians in Washington have to put aside their partisanship and their allegiance to the NRA and get something done. Think about the children and the communities all across our country that are suffering from the scourge of gun violence. We need the United States Congress to step up and do its job.
Hey there, Mayor. This is Karine Jean-Pierre. I just want to lean in a little bit more on the Mitch McConnell. You said that he was an obstructionist. You just laid out the partisanship that's happening in Washington, D.C. If you were in front of Mitch McConnell right now, because he's really holding this up, he can bring, as you know, he can bring back the Senate, end the recess, bring them back, have this vote. What would you say to him so that he can listen to you and his constituents and not the NRA? What would you tell him?
I would tell him to think about the children who are suffering. And give me some tool to explain to them that the partisanship and the obstruction should take precedence over their lives. He needs to strap it on, get in the game, bring the Senate back, and let's get something done.
Mayor Lightfoot, I want to ask you this, just to widen this conversation a little bit and talk a little bit about President Trump. You know, we've gone very rapidly in the course of this week, it seems to me, from Democrats laying a lot of the blame on what happened in El Paso and Dayton at Donald Trump's doorstep, to saying first that he is a friend of white nationalists, to saying he is in fact a white nationalist, then from saying that he is a friend of white supremacists, to now saying he is a white supremacist. We have 6 Democratic presidential candidates who've now come out and said straight up, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, is a white supremacist. So I want to ask you whether you agree with that, and if you agree with it, what is to be done about it for communities by and for communities of color, big cities like yours, in which African Americans are such an important part?
Well, this continuing obsession with what Donald Trump is, what he says, what he does. As a mayor of a big city with a lot of challenges, it doesn't get the job done for my residents. I have to focus on the needs of my people, the folks who are working class, who get up every single day and are still worried about whether or not they're going to have a paycheck to be able to take care of themselves and their children. The niceties of the debate, that's a luxury that people in cities like Chicago can't afford. We want to worry about good schools, a safe neighborhood, making sure that we have affordable housing. Those are the things that matter front and center. And I've said this to every Democratic candidate who's come knocking on my door. Talk to the people whose lives are in the balance every single day. If you do that, you're going to have a winning formula. But if you constantly chase after every single tweet, every single thing that he does on social media, you're missing the point.
Rev, the mayor, I think, did not really answer my direct question, and I'm not being critical of her. I think what she's saying is that labels don't matter. I know you have been part of this debate for a really long time, and you just now off camera, we're marveling over how the speed by which this debate has moved on the subject of Donald Trump and race. We are now in a place where it's becoming mainstream for Democratic presidential candidates who call him a white supremacist. What do you say about that?
Well, I think that the speed is what is alarming, not the fact that
alarming?
They've gotten there. Alarming in the sense that 2 months ago it was controversial that I raised reparations at my convention to Democratic candidates. Now they're calling him a white supremacist, that if I had said that a year ago, they would have said there's Sharpton again. But I don't think it's inaccurate. But I also understand the mayor. There are those that have to function and get things done. And whatever name calling is done, she should not engage in. Right. I think what we really have to deal with here, though, and I'd like to address this to the mayor, is that when we deal with banning of automatic weapons, this is, in my judgment, a pro-police move. Because let's not 100%. Forget, police are running into active shooting spaces, risking their lives. People that debate me on when I call on justice for police that have stepped over the line. This is the 5th anniversary today of Michael Brown being killed in Ferguson. There are things going on. You've dealt with Laquan McDonald. We've dealt here with Eric Gardner. So people label us wrongly as anti-police, but the most pro-police people are the ones of us that are saying, ban these weapons because it is the police you're sending in to these situations that are risking their very lives. Police are the ones that are among the many beneficiaries of banning assault weapons in your city and around the country, Madam Mayor.
You're 100% right, and that's why police unions all across the country have championed the cause of banning assault weapons. Just 1 week ago in Chicago, investigating a shooter, our police officers stopped the car, took these unbelievable assault weapons with a 200 barrel loader, as well as armor-piercing bullets off of 2 people who wanted to do harm. The only reason you have armor-piercing bullets is you're going after police officers. So, Reverend Al, I think you got 100% right. We need to ban assault weapons.
Mayor, Chicago had a tough weekend. The country had a tough weekend. The president has hinted at sending in federal law enforcement to help police your city. Do you support that?
I don't, and the reason is because somebody coming from the outside who doesn't understand the nuance and texture of our neighborhoods is going to be of limited or no help, or worse, going to make conditions worse. We are working on building relationships between communities and the police that they serve. Having somebody come from the outside to parachute in and then leave, actually, I think will set us back. We have a plan and a strategy that is making progress. What we need is federal laws that do universal background checks so we can stop guns from floating over the border from Indiana, Wisconsin, and Michigan. That's where the president could actually have real impact.
As the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, thank you so much for being on and giving us your wisdom. Really, really helpful, and have a great weekend. It has been a week of tough stories. So we can all probably use a little bit of positive news, and that's exactly what's in store for our next conversation. Morning Joe is back with that in a minute.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.